Yes, sorry. Just had to go and step into the other square up on the screen. Um, right. Okay, so I've um, done a couple of talks so far on Shem and Ham. So the obvious next step on this is Japheth. Let me just share my screen for that. All right, you should be able to see that. So, um, right. As we all know, after the flood, the world was divided into three parts between the three sons of Noah, Japheth, Shem, and Ham. Uh, Shem, Japheth, Shem, and Ham. Let me just slow down for a bit so that I can speak properly. This map that you see is uh, more representative, I suppose, than factual. But in general, the Shemites, the sons of Shem, inhabited the eastern countries, the sections in sort of red there. The sons of Ham, who we talked about last time, took a lot of Africa and the Middle East, the sections in green. And the sons of Japheth, who we'll talk about today, inhabited the northern sections, a lot of Europe, Russia, and the rest of that in yellow. Um, now, I don't think this map is entirely accurate. You know, it's more a case of they had a map of the world and just colored the whole thing in right to the edges. Um, I don't think Japheth's sons kind of inhabited the far northern reaches of Siberia and all the way down to the south of Africa. Uh, it'll be an awful lot of dedication to go settle there just so that you can finish coloring in the map. In any case, we previously looked at Shem and Ham, and that's how they divided themselves up. So today we'll be looking at Japheth. Again, in Genesis chapter 10, it's the table of nations that describes all the sons of Noah and their descendants as well. Now, the descendants of Japheth don't show up in the Bible quite as much as the people of Shem and Ham. Most references to them are in passing or as an analogy for a very faraway place, but they do have quite an important role in shaping the world. We'll see in a minute that the Romans and the Greeks are both descended from Japheth. But the time when they were kind of relevant in the world falls in that roughly 400-year period between the Old and New Testament. So we don't really hear about them in the Bible, apart from as like a backdrop to the Gospels. So Genesis 10, verse 2 to 5 outlines the family tree of Japheth. It says, the sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, and Javan, Tubal, and Meshach, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, and Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families in the nations. Now, the isles, that word also means the coastlines, the coastal areas. So I've got the names that are given in the Bible in the top there, and just underneath are the names that are given in, is their modern or their Greek counterparts. So we'll just chuck that on a map to make it a bit easier to see where they are. The main thing to note here, it's a lot to keep track of all these people, but the main thing to note is that initially most of these guys settled in what is now modern-day Turkey. We'll zoom out a bit to see the rest of them later, but there's a book called The Jewish Antiquities, or The Antiquities of the Jews, by a historian named Flavius Josephus. He basically writes an account of the history of the Jewish people that runs in parallel with the Bible. And in part of this, he gives the Greek equivalents of the Hebrew names of these people and places. It's quite important because we often, in our culture and society, are familiar with the Greek names of these countries in all of our historical texts. So, for example, you might not have heard of the Dodanim, but you've probably heard of the island of Rhodes. Not to be confused with Rhode Island, completely different thing. Um, as well as this, some of these places are mentioned by their Greek names in Acts 2, verse 8 and 11, when the Holy Spirit's poured out on initially in Jerusalem. It says that people there were speaking the languages of the Medes, the Phrygians, the Cappadocians, and a few others. So that's the Madai, Togarmah, and Meshach in Hebrew. So zooming out a little bit to the wider Mediterranean, we can see Tubal, or the Ibeers, or the Spanish over in Spain, Elisha, the Aeolians, or the Greeks and Romans, Madai, who are the Medes, and Magog, also known as the Scythians. At the bottom there, you can just see peeking in the northern borders of Shem and Ham. Now, I'm going to skip over a few of these because there's really not much to say about Tiras, Meshach, or Madai. But a few of the others, in the context of the Bible story, do show up a bit more. So I'm going to lump a few of the others together because they're all kind of part of the same event that we'll get to later. So the sons of Gomer. Gomer had three sons, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. These all settled in central and northern Turkey, which are around this kind of area. Now, it's a little bit difficult to track the legacy of these people, like where they've come from and where they went, simply because this area around central Turkey it's kind of the trampling ground of kingdoms. When the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans, all these massive empires all came through and conquered this area, back one way, then back the other way, then back the other way. So it's all been conquered, razed to the ground, destroyed, burned, and then another group comes in and burns, another group comes in and burns. So there's not a whole lot of like solid history left around these parts because everything's been destroyed so many times. So Noah's flood occurred back in 2000 BC, and his children went to populate the earth not long after that. Within a couple hundred years, the Hittites, the descendants of Ham, set up shop in this region, in Anatolia. And they had a kingdom that rivaled Egypt in size and power. And any people with little city-states in this area either had to become Hittites or move somewhere else. Now, there's some indication that these people, Riphath, Ashkenaz, Gomer, and Togarmah, ended up moving north past the Caucasus Mountains, kind of off in this general direction. And they moved into the wide, flat plains of southern Russia and Ukraine, and became the ancestors of like the horse-riding nomadic barbarian hordes around there, the Scythians and the Cimmerians. But nomads like that don't really leave behind cities or artifacts, so it's pretty hard to pin down any history about them. So the divisions of countries that you see on the map here are not really what it was like when it was first settled with the sons of Japheth. This is more like 300 to 400 BC, around the time of the Greek and Persian empires. So that historian I mentioned, Josephus, claims that the descendants of Gomer are the Galatians. They may well have been at first, but the Galatians that Paul wrote from the New Testament were a completely different people. So one of the ways that you can track people historically of who they are and where they've been is that as they move around, they tend to settle places and name the place after themselves. So in northeastern Turkey, there are four towns kind of named after the Ashkenazi people called Ashuz, Ashenaz, Eshkenaz, Ishkenaz. It's all kind of corruptions of the name Ashkenaz. Now, they're only very briefly mentioned in the Bible. In Jeremiah 51:27, when the Lord is pronouncing judgment on Babylon, he kind of makes mention to the kingdom of Ashkenaz, just as one of the northern kingdoms in the region. Jeremiah 51:27 says, "Set ye up a standard in the land, blow the trumpet among the nations, prepare the nations against her. Call together against her the kingdoms of Ararat, Armenia, and Ashkenaz. And that's all it said about them. But another point of interest is that you may have heard of Ashkenazi Jews who are named after this Ashkenaz. So the reason for this naming is as the Jews were displaced from their homeland and the Israelites more generally, by various captivities, by various invasions, they migrated across a lot of Northern Europe. And as they traveled, they named the places that they settled after locations of places where they'd come from, and other places in the Old Testament. It's in the same vein as when the British set out, they named places like New York or New England or New South Wales after places from their homeland. In this case, as the children of Israel traveled out, the Rhineland in Germany was called Ashkenaz by the Jews who settled there, and later they were called Ashkenazi Jews. Later, they migrated across Eastern Europe and all the rest of that blue area. Similarly, Spain was called Sepharad after another place in the Old Testament. And the ones who went into Egypt called it Mizraim because that's the Jewish name for Egypt, which you'll, of course, remember from my last talk. Because, of course, you'll remember everything that I've said and you haven't forgotten anything. So the fourth son of Japheth is a guy named Javan, or Yavin. He's widely regarded to be the father of the Greeks, the Romans, and other people around the northern Mediterranean. So this is a bit of a family tree taken from Greek mythology. In Greek mythology, all of the gods and heroes all kind of stem back to this one character named Japheth, which is actually the Greek version of the name Japheth. And that's really interesting because we can track Japheth as being the father of Javan, who was then the father of the rest of these folks. So according to the Greek legends, Japheth was the great-grandfather of a guy named Helen. And if you've ever heard of the Hellenic Greeks, they were named after this guy Helen. Another one of his descendants is a guy named Tros, who founded the city of Troy. The Trojans come from him, and descended from that, Prince Aeneas, who went on to found Rome and the Roman Empire. So Japheth, it is ultimately the father of the Greeks and the Romans. So according to this historian, Flavius Josephus, Elisha, one of the other sons of Japheth, not Elisha the prophet, different guy. Elisha is the ancestor of the Aeolian Greeks. So he settled up there in Thessalonica. Their capital was Aeolia up here. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia, Elisha is also the ancestor of the Sicels of Sicily and the Greek inhabitants of southern Italy. So the ancient Greeks were a real seafaring people. They colonized a lot of the islands around here. Most of this area was Greek for a very long time, including over to Sicily. Tarshish was another one. Tarsus being one of the sons of Japheth. The location of Tarshish is quite difficult to pin down. We hear about it in the book of Jonah. Jonah fled from Joppa, which is over here. Joppa is now called Tel Aviv. And so Jonah fled from Joppa here to Tarshish, but the exact location of Tarshish is very difficult to pin down. Having read into it, there are theories ranging anywhere from Spain to Cornwall in Britain to Zimbabwe to India or Sri Lanka. Wherever it was a major trading hub, and the sons of Japheth had settled there. In 2 Chronicles 9:21, talking about the riches of King Solomon, it says, the king's ships went to Tarshish with the servants of Huram. Every 3 years, once came the ships of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, and apes and peacocks. Psalm 72, verse 10, says, the kings of Tarshish and the isles shall bring presents. So they're probably in the Mediterranean somewhere. But in any case, if if the historical evidence is so inconclusive that it could be equally Cornwall or Zimbabwe, we really don't know where it was. But probably not Cornwall because there aren't peacocks there. Pretty sure. One of the other sons of Japheth was Kittim or Chittim. Much easier to locate on the world map because there was a city in Cyprus for a long time called Kittim. It's the name's also sometimes used in the Bible as a bit of a catch-all for anyone from the islands of the Mediterranean. Not to be confused with a similar sounding word, which is Shittim, which means the acacia tree. There's an area in Israel called Shittim around the River Jordan in the land of Moab. And like the people of Tarshish, they were well known as traders and seafarers. In Ezekiel 27, 6-7, it's talking about the riches of the city of Tyre. And it says, of the oaks of Bashan have they made thine oars. The company of the Ashurites have made thy benches of ivory, brought out of the islands of Chittim. Fine linen with broidered work from Egypt was that which thou spreadest forth to sail. Blue and purple from the isles of Elisha was that which covered thee. So in that verse, it's using these places poetically as being, fine silks from distant lands, basically. And the last group of people on this map are the Dodanim, also known as the Rodanim. They were the people inhabiting the island of Rhodes, where the ancient wonder of the world, the Colossus of Rhodes, was at the harbour there. They don't really rate a mention in the Bible, apart from at one point Paul makes a stop in Rhodes on the way from Tyre through to Macedonia up here. Right, so the last group, which I'm going to stick all together, there's one spot in the Bible where many of the sons of Japheth are all named, and that's in Ezekiel 38 and 39. These chapters depict a couple of great wars that are going to occur at the end of days when Gog and Magog lead a confederacy of nations against the Lord's people and the city of Jerusalem. These chapters have got a very strong similarity to the book of Revelation. In chapter 19 and chapter 20 of Revelation, it describes what I believe are exactly the same events. The language and the imagery are extremely similar. And I'll point out in the next couple of slides some of the parallel scriptures between them, where we can see that. It's interesting to note that the events in Ezekiel 39 and 40 match up with Revelation 19 and 20, but Ezekiel 38 and 39 match up with Revelation 19 and 20, but Ezekiel 38 matches up with Revelation 20, and Ezekiel 39 matches up with Revelation 19. It looks like Ezekiel 38 and 39 actually depict two different events that are separated by a long period of time. This is, of course, talking about events that are to happen a long way in the future. And when dealing with prophecy, it's always take it with a grain of salt. This is my opinion of what it could mean. It's very difficult to tell what prophecy means, especially when it happens in the future. So let's have a look at some of these scriptures anyway. First of all, just as a refresher, these are the people we're talking about in red. Tubal is Spain over here. Magog is the land of Crimea and the Scythians, this little peninsula down here. Gomer, Togarmah, and Meshech are all right there in central Turkey. So Revelation 19 and Ezekiel 39 describe an event where, first of all, an army will rise against Israel. Ezekiel 39 says, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn thee back and leave but the sixth part of thee, and cause thee to come up from the north parts and bring thee upon the mountains of Israel. Revelation 19 talks about the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war. against him that sat on the horse, which is the Lord, and against his army. Both chapters describe some event where a whole lot of birds are gathered together. Ezekiel 39 says, speak unto the feathered fowl and to every beast of the field, assemble yourselves and come, gather yourselves on every side to my sacrifice that I do sacrifice for you. Even a great sacrifice upon the mountains of Israel, that you may eat flesh and drink blood. Revelation 19 says, I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather yourselves together unto the supper of the great God. And verse 21 says, and the remnant was slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls filled with their flesh. Talking in both cases about some great slaughter to occur, where the carrion birds come and feast afterwards. Eating the flesh of kings. Revelation 19, talking to the birds and such, it says that you may eat the flesh of kings and flesh of captains, so on and so on. Similarly, in Ezekiel 39:18, it says that you may eat the flesh of the mighty, drink the blood of the princes of the earth. It seems in both cases, an army will descend upon Israel, it'll be destroyed by the Lord, and the remnants will be eaten by birds. Whatever the case, Revelation goes on to say that after this happens, the beast and the false prophet, who are identified as Catholicism and Islam, are then cast into a lake of fire and brimstone, while Ezekiel describes it as the Lord sending a fire on Magog and them that dwell carelessly in the isles. The isles, as I mentioned before, typically means the coastline, the coastal areas of the Mediterranean. Now, the last time fire and brimstone occurred, it was the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It seems from like the geological record of the area that what probably happened there, there's a big tectonic fault that runs straight through Israel, and particularly right where Sodom and Gomorrah were. That means that when an earthquake happens, that has the potential to, open up and lava, fire and brimstone to come out and destroy things. There are similar tectonic fault lines running straight through Turkey, or Meshech and Tubal. Another one running straight through Italy, or the beast, and Turkey being a Islamic state. So when it says that the beast and the false prophet will be cast into a lake of fire and brimstone, here on this fault line we have the beast, and here on this fault line we have the false prophet, who, there's the potential for something to happen there, for both to be plunged into destruction of fire and brimstone. Now, the nations that were named here, Gog, Meshech, and Tubal, as I mentioned, are Russia, Turkey, and Spain, respectively. And here are some news articles from the last month describing Russia, Turkey, and Spain aligning themselves against Israel. The first one, Russia is being drawn deeper into the Middle East conflict. Russia has always been quite belligerent and antagonistic towards Israel and the Western powers. And more recently, they're forging strong military ties with Iran. And Iran is violently opposed to Israel. I think it's in their constitution that they want to destroy Israel. Russia backs Iran, Iran backs Hamas, and Hamas is actively fighting Israel right now. Second article here, bit over a week ago, Turkey has been steadily shifting their military alliance towards Russia as well. And last week he called for an Islamic alliance to counter what he described as Israeli arrogance, banditry, and state terrorism. In other words, calling the Islamic world to band together against Israel. And thirdly, Spain, this was a bit of a surprise. This has only kind of cropped up in the last couple of years, particularly this year with the Palestinian crisis. Spain has just totally thrown in their support with Palestine, and they are pushing for Israel to be prosecuted for genocide at the International Court of Justice. So regardless of what side you take on international events, these are the countries that were named in these books, and they are certainly lining up to be opposed to Israel. Um, so it certainly seems that the events described in Ezekiel and Revelation among the sons of Japheth are drawing much closer. And that's quite significant because straight after this war happens, in Revelation 20, verse 1 to 3, that's when Satan is bound for 1,000 years and cast into the bottomless pit. So we just have to get past this little hump of, potentially a cataclysmic world war, but then good times after that. Getting a bit close to the time limit, so I'll just skip over this. But as before, yeah, Revelation 20 and Ezekiel 38 describe another events. This happens after the 1,000 years that Satan has been bound. In that time, it seems like Satan is loose from the world. He deceives the nations and brings together Gomer, Togarmah, two of the sons of Japheth, Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, and several others, and basically gets this huge group of nations together, led by Gog and Magog, with the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. They bring an enormous army up against Israel and up to Jerusalem. And when that happens, the Lord rains fire and brimstone, rains judgment upon them. So it seems like perhaps during this 1,000 years, Jesus will come and be reigning physically here on the earth, perhaps in Jerusalem. And after this 1,000 years, when Satan deceives the world and brings them against Jerusalem with Jesus reigning there, which just seems like a bad idea, attacking God directly. But I guess people are going to fall for it in 1,000 years. We'll see how that plays out. But in any case, both of these events start with Gog in the land of Magog. So we'll just have a quick look at who that is. But we need to step back a little bit and look at Esau. Esau was given the nickname Edom, meaning red, because of his red hair and his the incident with the bowl of red stew. And ever since then, he's been associated with the color red. Esau had a grandson named Amalek down here. And Amalek went on to form his own nation called the Amalekites. And the greatest king of the Amalekites was a man named Agag. In Numbers 24, verse 7, giving an example, it says, his king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. It's someone's making a comparison saying, you'll be as great as this great king named Agag. So it's believed that the name Agag was actually passed down to all the kings of Amalek in the same way that all the kings of Egypt are called Pharaoh, or all the kings of Rome are called Caesar, after one great guy. So all the Agags were all the kings of the Amalekites. For example, in 1 Samuel 15, verse 8, it says, he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive. The first reference was back in Numbers, so it wouldn't be the same Agag, like 500, 600 years later in Samuel. So they're just all Agag all the way down. Now, the name Agag and Gog are linked in Hebrew over here. Agag is spelled Aleph, Gimel, Gimel, and Gog is spelled Gimel, I think Vav, Gimel. They both have this like double G letter in them. And in some Hebrew translations of the Bible, the two words Agag and Gog are used interchangeably. And it's understood that they are equivalent, that Gog is Agag and Agag is Gog. So bringing it back to Ezekiel, when Ezekiel says Gog in the land of Magog, it also means Agag in the land of Magog. Agag, who is Amalek, who is Esau, the red people. The next part of Ezekiel says the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. The Hebrew word chief is this letter resh. Resh or rosh. You also get the Indian word Raj from that. It's the chief, the head honcho. So the phrase the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal could also mean the Rosh prince of Meshach and Tubal. So it could be saying the Rosh prince, which is the Russian prince. Rosh, among biblical historians, is generally accepted to refer to the nation of Russia. And Russia has long been associated with the color red. So what we have is the land of Magog is the land of the Scythians, which today we call Crimean Peninsula. So when we're talking about Gog, the Russians, in the land of Magog, in the Crimean Peninsula, that's something that we should all be quite familiar with from the ongoing Russia-Ukrainian war, which started with the invasion of Crimea in 2014, 10 years ago. So yeah, we have Gog in the land of Magog. We have Spain, Turkey, and Russia aligning themselves against Israel. We have all the nations of the earth basically coming into alignment with the prophecies of Ezekiel and Ezekiel and Revelations. So it seems to me from these things that things are going to move quite quickly once they get going. So really, now is the time for us to be ready for the coming of the Lord and for the events of the end time. So I'd like to leave that there.